I'm going to do a non-technical talk today, which is a bit of a novelty for me, but we'll see how that goes. I want to try and share some of the experience that I've had over the last, decade working in cloud native. Talk a bit about how I've seen businesses be successful or maybe not be successful building a business around open source projects. I feel like I'm in a room full of friends already, but for those who don't know me, I'm Liz Rice. I'm an engineer by background. I've written some books about eBPF and container security. I will mention the second edition of Container Security is currently out in print. I've not seen a physical copy yet, but you can download a PDF version from the Isovalent website. Speaking of Isovalent, that's where I work. I look after the community team there. We were the company that created the Cilium project. Have we got any Cilium users here? Hands up if you, yeah? Woohoo, yes, okay, awesome. So we created the Cilium open source project. It's now become more or less the de facto networking standard for Kubernetes. And we built a business around it. And then about 18 months ago, we were acquired by Cisco. Yay, Cisco, thank you. So that's been part of my learnings, that journey. And I also learned quite a lot from the perspective of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, where I've been involved for a long time, things like governing board member and chair of the TOC. So I can't wave a magic wand and make your open source based startup successful, but maybe I'll say a few things that maybe will be helpful to somebody one day. I do believe that it is extremely possible for businesses based on open source to be successful, and that's partly because there is a lot of economic value in that technology that we're building. There was a report from Harvard Business School from last year estimates that if we were to rewrite all the open source software that's commonly in use, it would cost about $4 billion to rewrite it all. But because it's being used over and over and over again by so many enterprises, it's actually worth approaching $9 trillion. So there's a couple of things to take out of the difference between these two figures. The first, in my view, is that's nearly $9 trillion worth of economic value add that could be captured by businesses. We probably can't capture all of it, but there's a huge gap there. That's why I think it is possible to build businesses around open source. The other is that because it's such a huge gap, there is plenty to go around. This is not a zero-sum game. Everybody in this room could be working for a successful business without kind of taking the pie away from everybody else in the room. That said, not all open source code contributes to that economic value. The vast majority of that economic value is created by just 5% of open source developers. But before you're all disheartened, I think, how many of you here are developers or engineers of some shape or form? Right. Awesome, most of you, excellent. I think most of you in this room are probably part of that 5% creating value. And the reason why? Because you're involved in cloud native. And cloud native has become the software infrastructure for businesses today. In much the same way that businesses use electricity and they rely on getting, a standard voltage and a standard frequency from their electricity suppliers. They can buy their electricity from multiple different providers, but they expect it to be standard. And in the same way, platforms like Kubernetes and all of the associated projects that live in the CNCF and beyond, they have become a kind of common infrastructure to make it easier for businesses to kind of plug their applications in like they plug things into the electricity supply. And standardization is an important part of the value here. When people were sort of inventing electricity, figuring out how to adopt electricity and harness it for good, one of the things they had to do was agree standards for, well, what voltage are we going to use? What frequency are we going to use? For software, it's much easier to set a standard by just implementing things. For software, we don't need a standards body. We pretty much get adoption, or adoption leads to standardization. Kubernetes has become a standard not because somebody wrote a spec that said it should be the standard. It just proved it was good for the job. Lots of people have adopted it. It kind of won the orchestrator wars. Is anybody else old enough to remember the Betamax versus VHS? Yeah, so lots of people will tell you that Betamax was a better standard. I'm not trying to say that anything is better than Kubernetes. The point is that VHS tapes were the ones that were popular. People bought VHS machines. I think they were slightly cheaper. Adoption led to Betamax becoming obsolete and VHS really winning the war. And Kubernetes has pretty much become the de facto standard that people are using to write their software to. One of the reasons why it's become so widely adopted is because it's free, because it's open source. And not having to pay money for something makes it removes the friction for adoption. It's not just the freeness though, it's also the permissive license. It's the fact that pretty much whatever company you work for, there will be a lawyer somewhere who understands what the Apache 2 license means, or what the MIT license means, or even what the GPL license means. They might not be happy about GPL licenses, but for Apache 2, they're probably very happy for anybody to just start using that software. So there's very little friction. That's helped to increase adoption, hence we get a standard platform. But free software is free like a puppy is free. If I give you a puppy, you're going to have to feed it, you're going to have to take it for walks, you're going to have to pick up after it. There is effort involved, and the same is true for software. At least software of any complexity, it's not really free for life. And end users might choose to invest effort, they might hire engineers to do that work, to do that puppy care, or they might pay vendors. And that's why we have, dozens of certified Kubernetes distributions, dozens of certified hosted Kubernetes platforms, so people can make a choice whether or not they're going to do the puppy care themselves or hire a dog walker. Many other projects will also have enterprise distributions. There's probably, if they need to reach a certain level of complexity before people are going to want to or feel it's worthwhile hiring that puppy walker, but there are plenty of examples where that's true. And hence we end up with an ecosystem. So the core of the ecosystem is the open source projects themselves. Developers creating software, releasing it under an open source license, making it available on GitHub or wherever, so that end users can use it. And of course, it's not just a sort of one-time event of releasing software. There's a cycle of innovation where developers are getting feedback from users. There maybe is a community being built up around that software. There's a loop between what users want or the issues that they find and the work that the developers do to improve the project. Everybody is happy with the way this circle turns, but people don't really want to work for free, or only up to a point will they work for free. So at some point, money is going to have to enter the equation. I've only got 20 minutes, so we can't dismantle capitalism. So we'll just assume that we all need money to live with. And so developers maybe are aggregated into companies that are producing products based on projects, and the end users maybe become customers. There's not a completely neat alignment between all those things, but broadly speaking, that's the kind of relationship. And there's an important core of trust. If we didn't have the commercial relationships, we rely on trust, and that's a huge part of what makes successful open source projects get adopted, the trust that the project's going to work, that feedback will be respected, that the issues are meaningful, helpful issues. In a commercial environment, we kind of codify that trust in contracts. So sometimes contracts can feel a bit kind of combative and like something that people have to negotiate and fight over. But what they're really there to do is write down expectations. And if two parties have the same expectations, they can trust each other, or it helps to establish trust. So I think one way of making yourself more comfortable with the idea of contracts is to think of it as a way of codifying trust. So a nice metaphor for an open source project, I think, is a campfire. So maybe a group of friends collect some nice dry firewood. One of them's got a box of matches in the pocket so they can light a nice campfire. And the campfire is going to be our open source project. And other people walking past, maybe it's a cold night, they come and warm themselves by the campfire. And it's free to do that. Maybe the people who built the campfire actually want to encourage that community, so they invite people over and they make sure they feel welcome, and maybe they even write down a code of conduct, but they try and invite people and make them feel happy around that campfire. And maybe some of those newcomers will actually help out. They'll go and collect more firewood to keep the fire going. And some people will start adding additional value over the campfire, maybe for themselves or maybe for other people. So perhaps somebody brings some marshmallows and they start toasting them. Maybe they start selling the marshmallows to other people. Maybe they start doing a toasted marshmallow delivery service. I don't know. There are ways of building extra value on top of the campfire. And of course, somebody has to be able to relight the fire in case anything goes wrong. If it's a rainy night, I'm not making any predictions about the outdoor event this evening, but if the fire goes out, we need somebody who's got the box of matches, or who can do that really difficult thing with flints and sparks and hay, and they can relight the fire. So we maybe need some special skills. We may rely on some experts to keep that campfire going. So the campfire is our open source project. The marshmallows is an example of added value over above the campfire. And the added value is really important. You cannot sell the thing you're giving away. You cannot build a business around something that is free. You have to figure out what it is that you are going to ask people to give you money for. It has to be something over and above. And I think there's loads of cases. Docker is the real canonical example of this, where they had huge adoption, huge, community love, and incredible, they've really set the standard. They did that thing of standardizing what we think of as containers. But I don't really think they had a very clear idea of how they were going to add value on top, what it was they would sell over and above the free software that was awesome. So there's a few ideas here of the kinds of things you can do. Isovalent, we do have some additional features. We want the open source project to be completely usable by most people, but if you are a large enterprise with some specific scale concerns, for example, well, yeah, maybe you're in a good position to pay for those extra features. We also found that people are willing to pay to influence the direction of a project. If you want to add a feature to a project, you can do it yourself. You can hire engineers to do it. You can hire experts to do it. But that could be hard. Maybe it's easier to enter into a commercial arrangement with the people who already employ experts and help them, prioritize what you're working on with the application of money. That's okay. Loads of other ways that you can add value over and above the free software. And you're probably going to need somebody to sell those extra, because I know a lot of you put your hands up that you're developers, so I don't know, is anybody here actually in sales? Okay, we've got one or two. It's okay, I'm not picking on you. I'm actually going to say sales can be good. None of us like those cold emails that come in and try and sell us stuff. That's bad. But I think it took me a long time to realise that good sales is actually a positive thing. You know, if I go and I like cycling. If I buy myself a new bike, it might cost me a lot of money, but I'm really happy with that bike. I love it. That's great. I'm a happy customer. And the same can be true for software. If somebody needs something and they feel like they're getting good value for money and they're, you know, happy with the product they've bought, that is a win for everybody concerned. It's not, you know, it's easy as engineers to sort of feel like, oh, sales is a bit grubby or something, but it's not. It can be a good way of aligning interests. And aligned interests is super important for our ecosystem. If you're going to open source your software, you're going to build that campfire and tell people that it exists, you can only do that once. It is a one-way decision. And I think it's really important that you time it, that you don't just sort of start getting people involved in your project before you have figured out what your value add, what your defensive moat, as VCs would call it, is going to be. And you also maybe have the option to put your project into a foundation like the CNCF. And there are lots of benefits, particularly reassuring your user base that that project will always be open source, it will always be permissively licensed, that it is open to other people to help out. You're not going to, you will no longer be able to prevent anybody else from getting involved in your project. So again, timing there is really important. But even when you have contributed a project into the foundation, you're still probably the experts. If you're the developers who built that code, you know that project better than anyone. And you might be employed by a company to do some work, but you are not obliged by anybody other than your employer to do anything on that open source project. You are still a volunteer. Now, you might be an employee as well, so your employee might be kind of directing what they want you to do, and you've got a contract, so you've agreed, you've set expectations around what you're going to do. But all your work as a maintainer, when you have your maintainer hat on, or a contributor hat on, is voluntary. And that means you get to choose what you're doing. I'm not saying you should, you know, if you've said you're going to do something, I think you should do that, you should honour that contract or not. But you are not obliged to do other people's work. And this is something that I think is really easy for people to forget or kind of get the wrong end of the stick when they're thinking about what vendor neutrality means. As a vendor neutral project, or as a maintainer on a vendor neutral project, you can't stand in the way of somebody else, you can't block them, but it doesn't mean you have to accept everything that your competitors want to do. Solomon Hykes said that the number one rule in open source is that no is temporary, but yes is forever. If somebody wants to make a change in your project, you want to have confidence that they're going to maintain that feature going forward. Don't let people just throw stuff over the wall and create work for you. It's okay to require people, even if they're your competitors, to build up trust with you first before you start accepting things. Certainly we found there was a certain amount of pressure in the foundation to say, well, you know, you have to let your competitors do things on the project. Well, not to the detriment of your project. The most important thing is your project. And projects are not democracies. Think about what happens in democracies. We typically end up with two parties who have opposing views. That is not the way to run a successful open source project. Open source projects should be consensus driven and with contributors and maintainers who have aligned interests. So it's super important that you get the balance right between giving away work, encouraging adoption, and actually holding back that work and saying, no, my work is valuable. I'm not going to just give everything away for free. Aligning interests between customers, between vendors, between developers, that's what's going to make this ecosystem continue to be successful. I could probably talk about this for another 20 minutes, but Paul is holding the time's up sign. So I will just quickly plug again the workshop that was already mentioned by my marvelous colleagues, Nico and James, who are going to be talking about multi-cluster Cilium. They are also working on a book, another book, Cilium Up and Running, and you can talk to them about that. I believe that's tomorrow. And as I say, you can download a copy of Container Security, second edition, as of now from the website. I will be around all day, so feel free to come and chat and have questions. And that's it.